Chapter 1. Inez Espinosa. March 1st, 2086. 100 years ago, there were two grand cities on the Detroit River. The metropolis was a center of trade and commerce, a nexus of movement for cars, aircraft, and cargo ships. Detroit was a manufacturing powerhouse, filled with factories that belched smoke into the air, while Windsor became a center of culture and tourism. A bridge linked the two cities over the river, a tunnel beneath it, and a small fleet of ferries crossed the water. As the 20th century wore on, Detroit and Windsor's time of glory ended. The hard times started in 2015, when the Second Hyperspace War began. A battle was fought in both cities. It was short and destructive. The factories were ruined, the bridge destroyed, the people driven from their homes. Finally, Earth surrendered to the invaders and was occupied. Over the following 2 decades, the Advent Coalition systematically dismantled both Detroit and Windsor, reducing each city to scrap metal. Once the towns were demolished, Detroit and Windsor were rebuilt into mega-cities, identical to the ones built by Advent all over the world. For 2 decades, there was peace. But then the battle for Earth happened. Humankind rose up in rebellion against their alien oppressors, and once again there was fighting in the streets. Advent fell, and the twin cities found themselves in a state of anarchy. Many people were murdered by the tyrannical Advent regime, while many more were killed in the desperate battle for freedom. Then, once the occupation fell apart, starvation and disease swept through the megacities without restraint. Now, it has been 50 years since the war ended. Detroit and Windsor are slowly crumbling away. The people who remain here live in existence and not much else. Communal farms fill the lots where buildings once stood, while trees and shrubs overran other buildings that lay abandoned for half a century or more. Roads were pockmarked and broken, while factories that once brought power and wealth to the cities had long ago fallen silent. And as for the people who still eked out a living in this place, there weren't many opportunities left to earn money. Some went fishing in the nearby lakes of Erie and St. Clair. Others worked in sweatshops or on the farms. The luckiest found employment at a nearby military base, where the blue and white flag of the United Nations waved proudly. But for many young men and women of Detroit, there was only one employer who held the most sway over the city. Not because they somehow improved the town, but because their intense need for young people meant that new hires would be paid a fair and competitive wage. Binary Fusion was headquartered in the Rivertown Warehouse District and could be found, predictably, in a warehouse. From the outside of the building, the only feature of note was the massive collection of antennas and satellite dishes on the roof, suggesting the presence of a sophisticated operation. Aside from that, the outside of the building was quite unremarkable, but inside was another story. It was a high-tech facility. The Binary Fusion warehouse was divided into sections. In one corner of the building, there was row upon row of holoconference rooms. Each room was filled with holographic emitters connected to a central computer, allowing the occupants to fully immerse themselves in a customizable hologram. In another corner, technicians performed regular maintenance on a large hyperwave relay, a spherical computer that connected the holochambers to the antennas and dishes outside. With this device, the occupants of the holochambers could communicate in real time with someone on a completely different planet, or on a space station, or on some distant stellar outpost. There was also a corner of the building given over to living space. Dozens of small rooms contained beds and bathrooms, but no other amenities. To say the quarters were Spartan is a gross understatement. Finally, the building's main entrance led to an office area, where men and women in expensive clothes stressed themselves over numbers and figures and business-related things. As for what kind of business Binary Fusion is, it was the single biggest employer of young people in Detroit and Windsor, and that was solely because there was nowhere else to find employment. 2 years ago, all non-humans were expelled from Earth, leaving many businesses and homes empty. The downtown quarter of Detroit was filled with vacant storefronts where alien-run shops and stalls now lay abandoned. Most of the local humans who worked in those places were now either an employee or a client of Binary Fusion, a super modern version of one of the oldest workplaces in human culture. Binary Fusion was a brothel, a cyber brothel. Using a combination of holographic emitters and faster-than-light communication systems, Binary Fusion peddled its carnal services to lonely adults all over the Earth, as well as most of the surrounding planets and space stations. All these customers needed was their own holochamber, so that both the client and their hired partner could share a virtual environment. Their most frequent customers were the rich and powerful, with soldiers from the United Nations Army being a close second. Young people would spend 10 to 12 hours a day inside of their assigned holochambers, entertaining one holographic guest after another in highly realistic virtual reality encounters. And of course, soundproof bedrooms could be found in the building for those who craved the real physical experience. Of course, this is how a normal day would have gone. Today was not going to be a normal day at Binary Fusion. Just a few hours after lunch, the CEO, a short and angry-looking man, came bursting out of a nearby restaurant with a cell phone gripped tightly in his hand. He started running full tilt towards the Binary Fusion building, shouting into his phone, "And what did the security guy tell you the last time this happened?" A panicked voice replied from the phone, "He promised it wouldn't happen again, sir." "Then how the hell do you explain this?" The CEO gesticulated furiously at the sight before him. Emergency vehicles were forming a perimeter around the Binary Fusion warehouse. Police cars flashed their lights and blared their sirens to drive people away. Meanwhile, 6 military vehicles were parked outside the main doors. The armored personnel carriers were painted white and had the words UN Reclamation Agency painted in black on the sides. Soldiers wearing body armor and carrying weapons tried to stop the CEO from forcing his way into the building. "Sir, you need to stay outside. There's an ongoing hostage situation and hey, come back here!" Pushing and shoving at the reclamation agents, the CEO forced his way into the warehouse, where he found a frightening scene. A security guard was hunched over the receptionist's desk, bleeding from a wound on the side of his neck. 2 of the working girls were dabbing at his injury with a cloth. "He's got a knife!" one of them cried out. "He went into the holo booths!" The CEO raced down the corridor, following the sounds of voices coming from a far corner of the building. As he drew near, the CEO noticed what they were saying. "Step, I won't ask you again," the man yelled. "Come over here, right now!" "No!" cried the voice of another working girl. "Get away from me!" "Shut up! I'm your boyfriend and you'll do as I say!" No, you're not!" the girl screamed. "You're just some customer!" The CEO followed the voices to their source and pushed open the door of a holochamber. The name on the door said Stephanie Benz. Inside, he found 3 people, 2 working girls and a strange man who clearly did not belong here. Stephanie herself was cowering behind her co-worker, Lynn Potter, who was a slightly older blonde with vivid blue eyes. The intruder was a big guy armed with a kitchen knife. As soon as the CEO forced the door open, the intruder looked away from the two cornered girls and shouted at him, "Back off, man! Stuff's coming with me!" But the intruder never got to finish his sentence. He tried to reach out and grab the younger girl, but this was a mistake with immediate consequences. Lynn Potter, the blonde, lashed out violently. "Don't touch my friend!" she screamed. Before the CEO could do anything, Lynn shoved her attacker all the way to the ground and knocked the knife out of his hand. Stephanie panicked and tried to escape, making her way past the CEO and into the hall, where 4 reclamation agents parted to let her pass before pressing on. Meanwhile, the attacker and the blonde girl were still brawling. The man scrambled to his feet, grabbed Lynn by the front of her shirt, and threw her into a corner. Sparks flew, and there was a loud crashing sound as the holographic emitters were smashed to pieces. The intruder tried to turn around and force his way past the CEO, but before he could take 2 steps, Lynn tackled him from behind. This time, the man whirled around and punched her in the head, sending her reeling backwards. She hit the computer console on the wall and smashed most of the delicate machinery before slumping over. The CEO was so frightened he jumped back, clearing a path for the attacker to escape. However, the man was stopped from fleeing again. Blood dripping from her nose, Lynn wrapped her hands around his ankle and sent him toppling to the floor. The intruder roared with fury and tried to kick her. His next blow would have gotten her face, but that was when reclamation agents breached the room. 2 powerful sets of hands seized the intruder and pulled him away, sparing Lynn from any further blows. With much shouting and cursing, the man was dragged away by his captors. Another agent produced a nano-medikit and sprayed down the girl's injuries. A cloud of microscopic robots coated the girl's cuts and bruises, and then they started to repair the damage. The agent said, "You're pretty brave, lady. Nicely done." The CEO staggered into the room. As he surveyed the damage, his expression turned from fear to a completely new stage of anger. "The computer! The emitters! Oh no, this'll cost thousands to fix!" One of the reclamation agents rolled his eyes and mumbled in a low voice, "Not to mention the medical bills for your employee over here." "What?" the CEO snapped. "This girl just saved her colleague's life," the agent replied. "I think it would only make sense to pay for fixing her face. You know, as a thank you." The CEO looked down at his battered and bloodied employee. Then he pointed to the damaged computer and hologram emitters. "Here's your thanks, Potter," he spat. "You did all of this, so I'm taking the cost of the damage out of your salary. Every damn credit." The CEO, infuriated, checked the time on his smartphone. "And clean the blood off your face, Potter. There's a high-value client coming for you in 10 minutes. Despite the events of the day, Stephanie and Lynn were expected to work the remainder of their shifts. Finally, about 4 hours after the sun went down, the 2 girls left the building. Each one carried a travel bag with a change of clothes inside. Lynn was carrying a large black case strapped to her back. As soon as they got clear of the Binary Fusion building, both girls pulled off their credentials and stuffed them in their pockets. Lynn and Stephanie walked for about half an hour, following a walkway that ran along the riverbank. The lights from Windsor reflected in the black water like an extra constellation of stars, only to be broken up as a large cargo ship steamed southwest on its way to Ohio. Lynn and Stephanie came to a halt below a large bronze statue. 15 feet tall, the statue depicted the war hero Blake Robinson shaking hands with Thomas Hutch, one of the leading members of the old Advent regime. The plaque at the base said this: "At this spot, on 25 July 2035, Captain Blake Robinson of XCOM accepted the unconditional surrender of Advent Regional Administrator Thomas Hutch in an event that is generally regarded as the final collapse of the Advent Coalition and the official moment of the liberation of Earth. The two girls collapsed onto a bench and sighed. Lynn undid the straps on her case and opened it. While she unpacked the contents, Stephanie looked at her watch and said, "My dad's already on the way, and he's so angry. Are you going to be okay alone?" Lynn shrugged and stood up. "You saw how I handled that creep, didn't you? I'll be fine. You make sure you're taking care of yourself, okay, Opal? I'm worried about you." Due to their line of work, these two girls almost never used their real names. So when Lynn called her friend Opal instead of Stephanie, the younger girl understood her friend was being serious. Opal gave her friend a hug and replied, "Thanks, Nezzy. I appreciate it." Inez Espinosa, who called herself Lynn Potter at work, giggled and withdrew an object from her large black case. "Don't call me Nezzy. Come on, might as well jam while we wait." Inez sat down on the park bench with an acoustic guitar across her lap. She tuned the instrument for a moment and then started strumming a melody. Then she tested her voice with a short tune. "My gal pal's friend punched me in the face, and then my paycheck vanished without a trace." Opal giggled. "Seriously, Nezzy, are you going to be okay? I know you don't have any family out here and..." "Don't call me that," Inez groaned. "And I've got family, I just haven't heard from them in a while. A long while, you know?" Inez started to strum the guitar in a way that signaled the end of the conversation. Opal sighed and set the open guitar case on the ground in front of herself. Then she and Inez started performing together. This late at night, only a few people were left in the park, but the harmonizing of Inez's guitar and Opal's voice lured people to them like moths to a flame. One by one, Detroiters and Windsorites stopped what they were doing to take in the sweet sounds of music. Opal went first, singing a melancholic tune about the old world. A few credits landed in the open case as people enjoyed the show. After that, Inez sang a love ballad, pointing directly at some of the men in the park and giving them seductive stares. For maximum effort, Inez threw back her wavy blonde hair and struck an alluring pose. Coins were gathering in the guitar case like snow. Then the two girls performed a duet. After about 15 minutes, some 24 people were enjoying the performance. But like all things, the show came to an end. An electric car pulled up to the parking lot, and Opal's father, who looked way too old to be defending his daughter from creeps, hobbled across the park. Opal waved a sorrowful goodbye to Inez and promised to talk to her later. While her friend departed, Inez packed up her guitar. "Sorry guys, show's over." With a guitar on her back and a change of clothes in the bag under her arm, Inez started walking home. It was a 20-minute walk from the riverfront to Inez's apartment. Even though it was close to midnight, the city was still very much active. Hundreds of people filled the streets as they moved from place to place. Electric vehicles hummed quietly on the roads, and up above, Inez could hear the deep rumble of a starship coming in to land at the spaceport. Inez was about 5 minutes away from her apartment, having just walked past a street sign that said she was entering Elmwood Park, when some people who knew Inez spotted her. A pair of young men, both older than Inez, approached her seemingly out of the shadows. "Well, well, well! If it isn't Potter, the wannabe cage fighter," said the first man, a muscle-bound figure named Nathan. Inez tensed up. She knew Nathan. He was a binary fusion client, and he paid good money to spend the night with both Inez and Opal on several occasions. Inez dreaded those weekends when she found Nathan waiting for her in one of the private rooms at Binary. He was a creep, and he was known for treating women badly. Nathan's friend, a man called Alan, laughed aloud. "Fighter?" Alan quipped. "No way, she's skinnier than a sectoid." The two guys continued harassing Inez, comparing her to different alien species as she tried to maneuver around them and get to her apartment complex. "That probably explains why she messed up Jed's face today," Alan said. "Jed?" Inez snarked. "That guy who broke into Binary today was a friend of yours?" "Roommate," Alan growled. "We had to bail him out of jail. He told us you brainwashed Steph into running away from him." "What's your problem, freak?" Alan said. "Why you gotta come between a guy and his girl like that?" Inez could see her building now, just a few more meters. "You mean between a stalker and his victim?" she snarked. "I'd have thought that was a no-brainer." Less than 10 meters from the entrance to her apartment complex, Inez felt a hand clasp around her shoulder. Nathan's voice barked in her ear. "I think it's high time we taught you a lesson, Potter!" About 5 minutes later, Inez was inside the building and outside her apartment door. She was panting, and her knuckles were covered in blood that wasn't her own, but otherwise she wasn't any worse for wear. As she fumbled with the keycard, a door opened behind her. "Evening, Nezzy," said a man's voice. "Your mail showed up in my box again today." Looking around behind her, Inez spotted a man who lived in the apartment next to hers. Lawrence Ridge was a rugged-looking black man, 29 years old. He was heavy-set with a square face that made him look younger than his actual age. His eyes were framed by a set of rectangular smart glasses, a digital heads-up display just barely visible behind the lenses. He waved a single envelope over his head to get her attention. When Inez took the letter, Lawrence looked at her knuckles and raised an eyebrow. "Do I want to know?" he asked. "Do you really want me to tell you?" she replied. "No, I don't." "No, you don't." The two stared at one another for a moment. "Are you going to be okay?" Lawrence asked. Inez wiped the blood on her jeans. Most likely." Lawrence raised his eyebrow again. "Do you want some company?" "Come on, Nezzy. You might be fine later, but you're not fine now. How about someone to just vent at?" "Do not call me Nezzy," Inez groaned. Then, with a long, drawn-out sigh, she added, "Yes, actually I do need to blow off some steam, if you don't mind losing some sleep." Lawrence closed his apartment door behind him. "Sure," he said. "Why not?" Once they were both inside of her apartment, Inez dropped her purse and the letter unopened on the kitchen counter and then moved to join Lawrence. She felt as though the weight of the world lifted from her shoulders just a little bit. Both she and Lawrence kicked off their shoes and collapsed on the couch in her living room. She vented to her neighbor about today's crisis at Binary Fusion, and he listened attentively. When she retold the story of the confrontation with Nathan and Alan, Lawrence did not overreact with oaths of vengeful violence as she expected him to. Instead, he asked a question. "So, did you use those lessons I taught you? The ones about self-defense?" "Sure did," Inez replied. "Alan's going to be breathing through his mouth tonight, and Nathan will be eating with his left hand for weeks. Between the three of them, Jed, Nathan, and Alan, a lot fewer girls at Binary are going to be harassed." "Preach!" Lawrence snapped his fingers with satisfaction. "Nezzy, keep this up, and you'll be a real vigilante." Inez threw back her head and laughed. "Don't call me Nezzy," she said. "Besides, I'm not going to be the next Jericho, or Blake Robinson, or Mommy Tommy Hanna, or anything like that. I just hate control freaks, that's all. I just want to have good times with good people. Is that too much to ask? Lawrence let out a big belly laugh. I can't speak for the rest of the world, but you're damn lucky it's not too much to ask for in this neck of the woods. Inez and Lawrence both sighed and looked at one another. You have to work in the morning, huh? Lawrence asked. Yeah, another 12-hour shift, she replied. It's really gonna suck having to put up with an angry boss all day. Lawrence put his arm around Inez's shoulders and asked, Want to forget about all that? At least for a few hours? Feeling relaxed, Inez nodded. Give me some good times? She asked. Yeah, Lawrence agreed. Good times. Inez sprang off her couch and started to retrieve several bottles of beer from the kitchen. Behind her, Lawrence used a remote control to activate the entertainment system. At once, every light in the apartment dimmed, plunging the living room into semi-darkness. The only illumination came from the city lights outside. It took Lawrence a couple of minutes to adjust his eyes to the darkness. In that short interval, Inez disappeared into her bedroom and re-emerged just 2 minutes later. She had changed into a new outfit, one meant for parties. It was a 2-piece luminescent costume. Thanks to fiber optics woven into the material, the tube top and miniskirt both glowed with a gentle blue light, just soft enough that Lawrence could see through her clothing as though it wasn't there. Interestingly, her vivid blue eyes could just barely be seen in the darkness, almost as though they too were glowing, but with far less intensity than her outfit. As soon as Inez re-entered the living room, the entertainment system started to play a pre-programmed laser and hologram show, synchronized to high-tempo synthetic music. Beams of red, blue, and green light crisscrossed the room, while intense beats and rhythms shook the windows. Inez let her hair down in a cascade of wavy blonde curls, and then she grabbed Lawrence off the couch, pulling him into the center of the room. They started dancing their hearts out, drinking beer and thundering their feet on the floor to the tempo while holographic galaxies spun into existence around them. Nebula filled the room while supernovas popped and crackled around them like a fireworks display. With beers in hand, Lawrence and Inez carried on their 2-person dance party for nearly an hour. They jumped and moved to the beat, sang as off-key as they could, drank until their vision started blurring, and they forgot why they were drinking in the first place. At some point, Inez, too inebriated to stand up, let alone walk, tripped over her own feet and fell. Lawrence grabbed Inez and held her steady. The two laughed long and hard, slumping back onto the couch. Inez gave Lawrence an imprecise and very drunk kiss. Around midnight, the hologram and laser display ended. The only source of light was Inez's outfit, but her glowing clothes failed to illuminate anything other than her own body. And Lawrence was drawn to Inez as though she were magnetic. He wanted to touch every inch of her, and she was eager for him to start. Lawrence pulled Inez to him, and they kissed intensely, locking themselves together by the lips without so much as coming up for air. Acting mostly on instinct, Inez fumbled blindly at Lawrence's clothes while he did the same for her. Somehow, in full defiance of their drunkenness and the darkness, Inez and Lawrence stumbled their way to the bedroom, leaving a trail of discarded clothing behind. As the couple completely lost themselves in the moment, Inez's luminous clothes hung off the nightstand, shimmering and glittering as though 2 pieces of the night sky had fallen to earth.